Hey, I'm Jacob Crawford, and this is my action research project. So the topic of my research project, I wanted to ask a question, and the question I asked was, how does poverty affect a student in the long term? So I'm looking at K through 12 and the effects that child poverty has. So I wanted to start out with a snapshot of what's going on in the USA today, and it says here that 15% of children ages 17 through 17 in the entire country are suffering from poverty, and the snapshots get smaller and smaller. It says here in West Virginia, in our state, it's 20.4%, and in Mercer County, 26.1%. That's over a quarter of this county's children are suffering from poverty, and I think that's really unfortunate. So my hypothesis is that children who experience poverty are significantly less likely to remain model students throughout their educational career and are more likely to have lower attainment and long-term negative outcomes. So I wanted to highlight model students, and I want to talk about what that means. So we're going to define model student. What is a model student? So what I view as a model student personally is someone who consistently attends school. We have good attendance, more days here than not, completes work on time. We're not looking at stuff that's being turned in months later, and behaves responsibly, doesn't get into trouble very often, doesn't backtalk the teachers a lot, very well-behaved student, and stays engaged in learning, doesn't have any attention problems, isn't falling asleep in class. That's a big one, just staying engaged. So all of these make a model student. So we're going to look at some long-term outcomes. So I looked at several different sources here, and one of which was from the Ivy League School of Columbia, specifically their business school, and they did a student body assessment research that basically said that students in poverty are much more likely to not graduate high school, and they have lower college enrollment and just lower lifetimes earning in general. Even looking past education, these students are much less likely to be on the higher end of the income spectrum due to their things. And they're also much more likely to have mental health issues. So it really all stacks together. Those sound unrelated, but mental health issues can affect your college enrollment, which is another thing, your high school graduation. So it all ties together, leading back to child poverty. And a little fact here, only about 62% of students who grow up in child poverty graduate high school. Only 62%. That number is way smaller than someone who comes from an average income household or higher. So I did find, and this surprised me more, that intervention is absolutely worth it, and you can absolutely, more likely than not, affect a child's ability to become a model student, even if they are suffering from child poverty. So Harvard University, another huge Ivy League, as I'm sure you've heard of, did a study called Developing Children, and they show that early interventions are really good for the mental health aspect. So that is reducing stress, improving academic readiness, so they're not taken surprised by projects and a high workload, tests and things like that. And things like those, remember, education is just one big timeline. Early intervention like that can really help with mental health problems after they graduate high school, after they graduate college, things like that. So that is really important. And UC Davis founded a program called Head Start. It's a California-only based program, and it is exactly for what this slide is about. It's about intervention in child poverty, specifically around education, as young as 8 years old. So we're really, really early. And they assess the curriculums, they assess the standards of California and different counties, and they provide packets that help these students study who may not be, they may not have very good attention and things like that. So it really just helps them stay along. Remember that academic readiness, it really helps them just stay engaged so that they can keep up with the other kids no matter what's going on at home. They also, outside of academics, they have nutrition guides. So basically like, hey, if you are not getting this, this, and this at home, we can provide this, this, and this, and the packet will detail that for the parents or just for themselves at school, give it to a teacher, things like that, and just counseling help. One thing I'm going to talk about a lot, I already have, is mental health. This stuff is really bad. Poverty can be really bad in your mental health, and mental health, as we said, affects your graduation rate. It affects how likely you are to enroll in college, how much money you're likely to make in the future. So it's really, mental health is incredibly important. So those are my two sources there, are Harvard and UC Davis. So first I did an interview, and I did an interview with my mother, who is a worker at the Board of Education, and she specializes in relocating students in child poverty and helping with that, helping homeless students specifically. So people who have the worst of the worst in child poverty, straight up homelessness. And she created a company called iCare. iCare is a tech startup that was originally attached to our county, Mercer County, who, as we said, has a 26% child poverty rate, which is awful. But now it is attached to multiple counties across the countries, and it's a way for families in poverty to contact her team. They can scan the QR code on their shirts. They have posters. They put this QR code everywhere so that if you somehow have a phone or just anything that can scan a QR code, you can scan this and you can get in touch so that you can help a family. You can get help, the help you need. You can get the help for your children, especially. You need them to go to school, things like that. And on top of that, she also volunteers regularly with assistance programs for children with special needs. My brother has special needs. You know, she was raised in that kind of thing. We didn't have a lot of money in the beginning. So she's been around this stuff. So believe me when I tell you that when I ask her these interview questions, she's the source. You know, she knows the right stuff. So let's talk about the questions I asked her. I asked her 4 questions, all relating to her work, okay? And just for credibility, the first question I asked was, how long have you worked with students experiencing homelessness in this country? What are the most common school-related problems you see in students who are homeless or in deep poverty? In your experience, which issues are most harmful to a child's learning long-term? Which school supports or community supports have you seen work best? So not only are we getting some personal experience questions, we're also talking about what works best, what works worst, kind of thing. So first answer to her question, how long have you worked with students experiencing homelessness in this country? And this is a direct quote from her. I've been working with students experiencing homelessness in Mercer County for about 4 years. During that time, I actually helped create the iCare program to provide support, resources, and guidances to these students so they can stay in school and succeed despite the challenges they face. Second question here is, what are the most common school-related problems you see in students who are homeless or in deep poverty? So I like that we're moving away from homelessness and we're talking about full deep poverty. We're talking about, you know, people who may not be over the edge, no house, living on the street, but people who are struggling and it's not apparent that they're struggling. So she says the most common problems I see are attendance. We mentioned that. Concentration, that ties into mental health. Paperwork, the workload, and transportation. That's something we have not talked about. You know, people in poverty, they can't afford gas to go to school all the time. Maybe bus doesn't go to their selective house, things like that. They often miss school because of unstable housing or lack of reliable transportation, struggle to focus when they're worried about basic needs, and fall behind on forms or assignments because their lives are constantly in flux. That chaos of we don't know what we're going to do, we don't know what we're going to do, really affects mental health, which, as we said, in the long term, go back to the hypothesis, in the long term, mental health can really affect not just your late education, but even after your education. So you need those basic needs so that you can have a good mental state. Response number 3 to the questions. In your experience, which issues are most harmful to a child's learning long term? And she says, I quote, in my experience, attendance and concentration tend to have the most long-term impact on a child's learning. Missing school frequently makes it hard to keep up with lessons, and when a student can't focus because of stress or instability at home, it affects not just their grades, but their confidence and ability to succeed in the future. So it all ties back to that mental health problem, and here we're talking about attendance and concentration. School, for someone struggling for such basic needs, can feel like such an afterthought. Like, I don't need to worry about school. I don't need to worry about class, all this. I'm worrying about how I can get food, how I can stay clean, how I can keep my little brother and sister clean, things like that. So school can kind of become an afterthought when you're dealing with all these problems. And, you know, they just struggle to keep up with lessons and the workload. And that, honestly, you know, you see your grades get affected like that. Like she says here, that affects your confidence, and that even ties more to your mental health. Final question here. Which school supports or community supports have you seen work best? So, in her company, iCare, she mentions this. I've seen programs that provide consistent hands-on support work best, like iCare, her company, which helps students with basic needs, transportation, and school resources. Community partnerships that offer tutoring, mentorship, or access to food and housing assistance also make a big difference. The key is removing barriers so students can focus on learning rather than just surviving. That's a really big quote, learning rather than just surviving. And when you go back to the very beginning of that answer, she talks about community supports, not just education supports. If you want to help a child in poverty, a student in poverty specifically, not all the help you can give them should be school related. Sometimes we're talking about basic needs, nutrition guides, hygiene, transportation, things like that. Now, obviously the education stuff is very important too, like tutoring assistance and whatnot, but you need to make sure that they are able to easily survive and get their basic needs before you can worry about their education, is basically what my mom is saying here. So my thoughts on her responses, and I thought a lot about this. So I honestly think it really reinforced my hypothesis that, things in the beginning will really affect the long term. Child poverty will really affect how you are in later education and when you graduate. So her examples about attendance issues I thought were spot on, especially with trouble concentrating and transportation. I didn't actually even think about transportation until that interview, so that was a big wake up to me. And it just showed me how much obstacles there is. You take a lot for granted as someone who's well off going to school. I have the transportation, I have the child nutrition when I get home, I have help with this, my life is stable so I don't have to stress and get into a bad mental state. Those kids don't have that, and that's what really, all that stuff in the beginning, like my hypothesis said, can really mess up your long term. So it just showed me how many obstacles there were, and programs like iCare and similar, not just school-related ones, but just community in general, are absolutely crucial for helping these students stay on track and succeed despite those challenges. So you need to help them with those obstacles because Lord knows there's so many. So, was my hypothesis correct? This study found that children living in poverty face significant barriers, as we just mentioned, like lower attendance, limited access to resources, and huge one here, social emotional challenges, mental health. And this obviously, as we've confirmed, messes with your long-term results. So I think the interview absolutely supported my assignment. They are less likely to be model students, but interventions, and these are way more effective than I thought when I first started this research, interventions are absolutely worth it. Programs like iCare and similar absolutely make a better choice. And it doesn't have to be a big program. You as a teacher, you as a student, a classmate can help. You can intervene in a child's life to make sure they have a good education later on. So here's what I learned. Here's what I learned specifically. We talk about transportation. Poverty has a clear negative impact on long-term educational outcomes. That is non-negotiable. There is absolutely downsides that can be present. If you are struggling in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, you will see results in 8th grade through early college, whatever. But interventions do work. We talked about Head Start at University of California at Davis. We talked about the school-based supports at Columbia. And then we talked about Harvard's Developing Children program in Massachusetts. They improve attendance, they improve engagement, and they improve achievement. That's the real thing we're looking at, achievement. We want to get them on par with kids who are well off, and we have to deal with those obstacles. So research and interviews shows that with the right support, students and poverty can receive the proper help to succeed. So intervention can get them on par. So here are my sources. It's just multiple universities and different things. I forgot to mention I also got some stuff from UC Berkeley and Stanford, but they didn't really make the cut in the last slide. That's where I got the research for my interview questions. Thank you so much for watching.